You're listening to The Empowered Advocate, a podcast from Greensboro Pregnancy Care Center. Hey, Empowered Advocate listeners, we're back with another episode for you today, and I asked you guys what you wanted to hear about, and you told me peer advocacy. You guys have a lot of questions about what that looks like, and you wanted to hear from someone who is a peer advocate. So today we have one of our lovely volunteers with us, Stacy Helt. Say hi, Stacy.
Hello.
We're glad you could be here with us today, and we're just going to hear from Stacy. She's going to give us like a firsthand account of what it's like being a peer advocate. So before we get into that, Stacy, just tell us a little bit about you. What do you do now? How long have you been volunteering here? Just give us a little background.
Well, I've been in Greensboro about 20 years. I have been an advocate here for the past 5 years. I'm married. I have 2 grown children who one lives in Greensboro and one lives in San Diego. I have really enjoyed the last 5 years. I've learned a lot. I feel like the care center has come a long way, and we'll get into it later, but I've grown a lot in this volunteer position too, so it's been fun.
And you're going to school now too for...
Yes, I'm at Forsyth Tech. About 2 years ago, I stepped away from elementary school teaching, and I felt God leading me in a different direction, and I feel like volunteering here at the care center has been another step towards leading me to being a sonographer. So I have 1 more year. I graduate a year from now, and I'll be a registered sonographer.
And we can't wait until you're done.
And I don't know what happens next after that, but I would love to be doing something here or doing something else with women who are pregnant and hearing that heartbeat for the first time. So.
We'd love you to be here too. So yeah, that's really exciting though. I would love to be able to do that too. Maybe someday down the road, but
well, this is definitely a someday down the road for me.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and jump into it. So, Stacy, tell us, what is a peer advocate and what does that mean? What do you do as a peer advocate?
As a peer advocate, I am a volunteer who comes in weekly. People can choose their volunteer hours, but I come in to be a listening ear, to kind of guide a client through some decision-making processes, to be a Christian advocate. I share the gospel with clients. I talk to them, sometimes giving my life experience, but just giving them information and resources about whether they come in and they're pregnant or are getting tested for STIs or coming in for an ultrasound, just kind of listening to what they have to say, helping them talk through their feelings. Everybody has a decision to make when they come in, and just sometimes talking to someone can help you make that decision.
And I know from my time when I was an advocate, a lot of people I talked to did not have anyone to talk to outside of that conversation. So I know how valuable that can be.
We get clients who may not have family in town, or, sometimes it's harder to talk to people that you know really well because they know your whole background and they might already have made a judgment about you. So. Right.
Now, is it just you alone in the room with that woman, or who else is involved in the process?
The way the appointment works, a client will come in and fill out some paperwork, and I'll get a chance to kind of look over a little bit of her paperwork. I will speak to one of our nurses that we have here on staff. The nurse will also look over the paperwork. We want to see what the client's needs are, to see why they're coming into the care center, what it is that they're looking for from us. And so we will go out, the nurse and I will go out to the waiting room. We will introduce ourselves to the client, and then the nurse will take care of the medical portion of the appointment first.
Okay.
Whether it be a urine specimen or medical questions, and just getting a background of that person. And so it will usually be the client, the nurse, and myself.
Okay. And then so they'll go do the pregnancy test or whatever, and then after that, it's just you. After the results, it's just you guys.
Yes,
you and the client.
Just the two of us. So the peer advocacy rooms are awesome. They're cozy little rooms, just very welcoming and confidential. We have some noises, white noise in the background, so people know when they come in that people are not going to overhear them talking about confidential matters.
Right. So. Gotcha. Well, tell me, so what made you want to be an advocate? What got you knocking on our door a few years ago?
Well, many years ago, my husband and I had an unplanned pregnancy, and with the new movie that's come out, we know that every pregnancy is planned by God, but it was not planned by us. My husband and I were in college at the time. We had a couple more years to go. We were 21. We had very supportive family and friends. We made a choice for life. But when you become pregnant, any choice is difficult. And there are always, no matter what you choose, there are things that you need to decide. And so choosing life was what we chose. And but it wasn't easy, down the road, financial hardship and things like that. That we have a 27-year-old daughter and almost 24-year-old daughter. But because of that love and support from our family, it made that decision very easy for us, but it's not always an easy decision for everybody. Yeah. So I wanted to come and give back. Years down the road at our old house, we kept getting a newsletter from the Greensboro Pregnancy Care Center. And I knew that I wanted to give back, and I would look at the newsletter, and then it would end up going in the trash. And then 6 months later, I would get another one. I knew that that's what I was supposed to be doing, but I was kind of nervous to try to come in and volunteer. So one year I made it my New Year's resolution, and I think I actually talked to Carter the first time that I called, and I came in and started volunteering. So.
Yeah, man, we're glad you came. Those newsletters are good for something.
They are. It's God speaking to you.
Well, that's really cool. So you mentioned you were nervous about getting started. What was it that made you nervous or scared about coming?
A lot of things. You really make yourself vulnerable. I wasn't sure at the time, before all the training, how much of my story I would need to share or get to share. I'm an introvert, and it's really difficult sometimes to open up to people and make connections. And when you haven't met someone before, and you just meet them right then and there and take them back and start talking to them, it can be really scary. And the first several months that I was an advocate, it's just the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
Because every single person is unique and their situation is unique. And so when they come in, at first I felt like it was a lot of pressure, because when they come in, I felt like I was expected to give them all the answers. And I didn't know all the answers, and that's okay.
Right.
I think the big thing about the care center is that you feel prayer when you walk in this building. I know that the staff prays weekly. I know that walking in, you feel God's presence here, and He is a part of every appointment. And so no matter what happens during the appointment, God has it covered, and He'll take care of it even after that client leaves the building.
Yeah,
So.
I love that. And what I've found too is that so many of the women who come in are really willing to open up and talk. I know there were times I would ask one little question, and all of a sudden they were spilling because something about that room that you just feel like you can open up and share. And when we're most vulnerable, usually we're more receptive to input and to help from other people. So
That's right.
That's neat. I'm sure that's good for anyone who's listening. There is some anxiety that comes along with that vulnerability, stepping into a room and being in a leadership role, like guiding a conversation. But it is neat how God works in each of those scenarios. And we'll get into more of that in a minute. But well, tell me, for anyone who's listening who's not familiar, what is the process for becoming a peer advocate? So someone hears and they're like, okay, I want to check this out. I want to get involved. What's step one?
Step one, I think, is always coming to an open house here at the care center. We hold open houses, I think, every other month, or sometimes more often than that, depending on the demand. But an open house here at the care center is an opportunity for you to come in and just see the welcoming facility, meet some of the staff, maybe hear the mission statement of the care center, find out what it is that you do here and why it's important. you can find out the future plans of the care center and how you can be involved. Sometimes when people come to an open house, they're ready to volunteer their time. Others are ready to volunteer financially, and all of that is a big part of the open house. You can also learn how to share the care center and its mission with people that are in your circle of friends or church members, so you can find out how to advocate for life. If you continue in the volunteer process, it works a little differently than when I started. It's a little bit different order of things. But after you've gone to that initial open house, there's a whole process of things that happen. It includes training. It includes shadowing, both the new volunteer shadowing someone else so they can see, someone who's experienced it before, maybe shadowing pregnancy test appointments or STI appointments and things like that to get an overview of everything.
Right.
But then down the road, someone would also shadow the new volunteer as they learn how to take part in their own appointments.
Right. So we didn't just throw you into a room.
Absolutely
with a woman.
not.
Gotcha. That's good.
And
I think that's some of the fear sometimes for new volunteers, though, that like, how am I going to be prepared?
Exactly. That's how I felt when I got started. And I was scared about that, but there was nothing to fear from that. And actually, I'll tell you really quickly that the first few times that I was supposed to do my own appointments, God knows my personality, and I had some anxiety. And the first 3 Thursdays that I came in and I was supposed to be on my own, the clients did not show up.
Right.
So by the time the next week rolled around, I was ready to get it underway.
Yeah, for sure.
So.
And that's the neat thing. When you shadow volunteers who are already peer advocates, you get to see different styles.
Definitely.
And because, we have scripts for, the volunteers, and we have kind of an order of events, but there's no cookie cutter way for communicating with someone. I think we all have our different ways of connecting.
Right.
So I think that's a neat thing too, that we let new volunteers do, to kind of see different styles.
I did look at scripts at the beginning, and I think they've over time evolved a little bit, and I have seen the newer scripts, and after 5 years of doing this, I still cover everything, but you kind of get in a groove, and over time you figure out what works for you. And as long as you're covering all the information and listening to the client, it becomes your own, and each appointment is actually different. So
yeah, sometimes I think you can hear the word script and think, okay, hey, welcome to the care center. How are you today? Like you're reading it, but it's a guideline, and like you said, just kind of putting your own style to it. I think that's what makes it real and makes it relational. So on that point, can you maybe give some tips? So from what I hear a lot from people who are like, I would be an advocate, but I don't even know how to communicate like with these women. How would I drive this appointment? What are some tips you've used just for connecting? So maybe not for going into the deep questions, but how do you just connect in those first few moments? Because it's kind of awkward. Like, they're there because they think they're pregnant, or maybe they're getting tested for an STD. How do you connect in those first few moments?
Well, kind of to tie in some of what I've already talked about, if you come for an open house, you're going to feel what this building feels like. You walk in and you feel prayer enveloping this building, but the staff is warm and welcoming. It's a beautiful facility. When I go out into the waiting room to connect with a client and go back to an advocacy room, I'm there with the nurse, just making warm conversation, giving a sincere compliment if she's brought someone with her, just making them feel welcome, trying to find something in common with that person. And then actually, we talked about the scripts and how you don't have to go in a particular order. I have found that after the nurse leaves and we've done all the kind of cut and dry medical portion, I used to try to work up to sharing the gospel, but now I found for me, it works to share the gospel right away, because if a client has someone that they've brought with them, I like to share the gospel before the dynamic of the room changes.
Gotcha.
And it also, I have found, just really, sometimes the client will open up either emotionally, whether they've grown up in church or haven't grown up in church, or just talking about God and Jesus and faith sometimes makes them realize that's something they haven't thought about for a while, and it really opens up some conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Well, like we mentioned before, anytime for any of us when we're in a vulnerable, we're experiencing something unexpected or painful or difficult, we usually start thinking about those deeper things of life a little more, and we're more maybe receptive to hearing those things. But I definitely want to talk more about the gospel side of things, because I know that terrifies a lot of people. So what we're going to do is we'll take a short break, and then when we come back, we'll jump into that aspect of the appointments about talking gospel with clients. All right, so we'll be right back.
Good.
All right, we're back with the Empowered Advocate. We're talking with Stacy Helt today about her experience as a peer advocate. So, Stacy, I want to ask you a few questions about sharing the gospel in an appointment. But first, just for anyone who's listening, the reason that we even talk about the gospel in our appointments, well, first off, Greensboro Pregnancy Care Center is a Christian organization. And so we really believe that the deepest need of every person is the need for a relationship with Jesus Christ. And so whenever we're meeting with someone who is experiencing unplanned pregnancy, or they're considering abortion, or whatever, we want to present them with the truth of the gospel, because we all need it. That woman sitting across from us needs it. The peer advocate needs it. All of us do. And so we want to give every woman the opportunity to respond to that. That being said, Stacy, you mentioned that in your appointments, you kind of jump right in. So after the nurse has left and given the results, you kind of transition. I think that's like a little scary for people who think they want to be an advocate. How do you make that transition? That might be a little awkward. How do you make it not awkward?
First of all, after a client has given their medical history, like I said, it's kind of cut and dry. And when the nurse leaves the room, I just try to, resituate in my chair and just kind of change the dynamic of the room. And I will let them know that we are a nonprofit organization, and I tell them that we are a Christian organization, which they probably already knew if they checked out our website. And then I ask them if it's okay if I share the gospel with them. And if they say no, that's completely fine. We meet everyone, where people of everywhere, and all religions or no religion, everyone is welcome here. So I do ask before I share the gospel. If they say yes, I can usually tell by their body language. Even if they've said yes, I can tell by body language whether this is going to be maybe emotional, or if they're eager to talk about the gospel. Right. And it just kind of leads in to truth and some really important factors of how they will make the next decisions that they need to make. So it kind of just sets the groundwork for the rest of the appointment, no matter what they say. If they say no, we move on. Right. And, we just discuss some other things, but it does lay the groundwork. If they are already a believer, we kind of talk about that a little bit and how that plays into their decision making. Or if they grew up in church and they're not sure what they think, we kind of talk through that a little bit too.
Do you find that in general, most people are receptive to hearing it, or do you see a trend at all?
I've only had 2 people in 5 years tell me that they did not want me to share the gospel. And I don't know how true that is with other peer advocates or what that ratio is. And that was fine. Sometimes people will say, yes, it's okay, but they just kind of tolerate that conversation, and that's fine. If that seed is planted, then it can do what God wants it to do.
Right. Well, God's word says that his word doesn't return void. Right. And so even if they're just sitting there, arms crossed, kind of staring at the ceiling, we can have confidence knowing that, his word is doing some kind of work on some level. So, well, that's really cool. And what I always have loved the times that I've met with clients is the ones who say, well, yes, I'm a Christian, or they identify as Christian. You can really use that, like you said, and apply it to their situation. Okay, well, how does your faith inform your decision? What do you think God thinks about the situation, or if they're wanting an abortion, I'll say, what does the Bible say about that? And it really forces them to kind of come to terms with what they say they believe.
Right.
I think the neat thing is we as Christians, we have the responsibility to hold that woman to the standard of Christianity if she claims to be a believer. And so that's kind of a comfort to know we don't have to tiptoe around it. We can just say, okay, well, if you're my sister in Christ, then how does this apply to your life? So,
and it's pretty amazing, because I don't know exactly, but I would say at least half of the women who identify as Christian, when asked how that applies to this decision or other parts of their life, they never really have thought about it. And so that's really an important part of being a peer advocate, is just bringing things to the surface that people may not have thought about. And even if by chance the appointment doesn't go well in your mind, if it caused someone to think about something, then it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do.
Exactly. Well, especially if someone's considering abortion, if you can just put that pebble in their shoe, we know, like, the Christian faith that you subscribe to says this, this, this. And if we can make them walk funny afterwards, they may leave and say, no, I'm doing what I want to do. But if they're thinking about it, like you said, that's just, priceless. And we may never know, this side of heaven. That's hard, but, that can be our hope. So what for you has been the most difficult thing, would you say, about being a peer advocate? Some of the challenges.
Kind of talking about that anxiety in the beginning of doing something that's new and scary. At first, it was really hard to share truth with clients, because you don't want them to be mad at you. You don't want them to walk away thinking, oh, what is the care center doing? This is not the place for me. But truth is truth. And the more that I shared the gospel with clients and talked to them about decision-making processes, the more I saw that people are actually aching for this. And they didn't even know that they were thirsting for this. And when they come into an appointment and just talk about things that we don't really talk that much about out in life. We don't talk about God's plan for sex in real, out in the world very much. And so people kind of are taken aback sometimes when we have that conversation. So that was really difficult at first. It can also be emotionally draining if you're doing it right. So if you're putting yourself out there, which if you decide to volunteer, I hope you will put yourself out there, but it can just be tiring, but in a good way.
Yeah. Well, anytime you're investing in the life of someone else, it's going to be a little bit exhausting.
Right.
You think about even Jesus' time on earth, he had to take some time to step away to be alone with the Father, because ministering to the needs of others does suck a lot out of you. And that's why, that's why we need to be filled, in your personal time and my personal time. We need to be making sure we're in the Word and, in prayer and everything. What would you say is one of the most rewarding things or things that you enjoy the most?
It's kind of tied right in with that. If you are giving it your all, the best thing about it is that you are being Christ's hands and feet. You are doing good. You are helping people. There was a woman in particular that I thought of that I spoke with last summer. She came into the care center. She was Muslim. She did allow me to share the gospel with her, and we had a really good conversation about our faiths. And she and her husband had 2 children already. And she talked to me about, she was considering abortion. And she talked to me about her 2 children and how important they were to her. And I explained to her that I have 2 children and they are very important to me. We kind of talked about how our faith plays into our life, and how I asked her how life was important to her. And we finally got around to the point that the new life inside her was also her child. And we had a really great conversation. And so it was it made me feel really great as she left, because as she left, she turned to me and she said, thank you for making me feel so welcome here. And I said, of course. And she said, no, really. She said, I think everybody who is making a decision like this should come to this care center or a care center. She said, it's really important.
And she chose life.
She chose life. Yes,
yeah,
she did.
And I know those moments when they choose life, there's nothing like it. Realizing, wow, God worked in this person's heart.
Right.
Maybe talk for a second. What about the times that they don't make that decision? They come in and you are on fire. You show them, you tell them about abortion procedures. You share the gospel. You have a good conversation, but then they say, I know that, but I'm still going to have an abortion. What's that experience like?
Well, they come in and we see Christ in everybody, and we know that life is really challenging for everybody who comes through the door, and we pray for those people. We've prayed for every client before they walk through the door. I usually try to pray with a client during the appointment if they'll let me, and we pray for them afterwards. We follow up with clients later on. I'll usually ask permission to call the client in a week or so to see how her decision-making process is coming. We can't make decisions for people, but if we believe that God has asked us to do this, then he will do what is needed. Some people will go ahead and have an abortion. We do offer abortion recovery classes here at the care center. We care for each person who walks through the door as well as their baby. We want people to be healthy, and we refer people for counseling, but we also have abortion recovery classes here too. So we do whatever we can, and just knowing that we might not reach every single person.
And that's a hard thing too. I remember in my early days as an advocate, when a woman would still choose abortion, I took it personally.
Definitely.
I kind of took responsibility for it, and I went back and I was like, okay, this is what I said wrong. This is what I could have said better. And I would kind of go and tick through and tally up my score personally. And it was really not healthy for me. And I think that's something we try to really hit on in the training too, is I'm sure you may remember, but our responsibility is not, like you said, we can't change their minds. We can't make decisions for them. Our responsibility is that obedience and sharing truth, because the truth is powerful, like you said, presenting it and showing love to these women, and then entrusting them to God and entrusting those unborn children to God. And sometimes it doesn't make sense. I remember I had one client, and she told me she was going to choose life. She wanted to. Her mother stepped in and took her to an abortion clinic, and she texted me after the fact, it's done. And she was devastated. I was devastated. And that beat me up for like so many months. I didn't understand it. But it's one of those things I think sometimes this side of heaven we won't understand. We have to trust God with, the things that are painful like that. But I know you've seen personally in your appointments, and we've seen as a care center how God has saved so many lives. So it's been really cool.
And during those follow-up phone calls as well, sometimes many times they don't answer the phone, but sometimes when they do answer the phone, if you've called several times, sometimes they will open up again and just say, well, I still haven't decided. And sometimes that, not nagging, because they'll tell you if they don't want any more phone calls, but sometimes just knowing that somebody is praying for them and still thinking about them makes a big difference.
Oh, I remember when I was client services director, one of our volunteers, she was very good about following up with people. And this one client who was abortion minded, she called once a week, every week for about 5 weeks. And the girl never called her back, but she just kept leaving her voicemails just saying, I'm praying for you. I'm here for you. And just letting her know she was there. Like 6 weeks later, she got a call. She called the client called the care center, and she said, I want you to know my advocate was this volunteer, and I was going to have that abortion. But knowing that someone cared enough to keep calling me and actually cared what I did, I want you to know that I'm carrying this baby to term.
That's awesome.
And she came back for parenting classes, and it was just the coolest thing. Like sometimes we think our efforts aren't worth it.
Right.
But even just those phone calls and just showing that you care about somebody, that can make all the difference.
Every little bit counts.
And that's
really
I love that. Well, let's talk a little bit about some do's and don'ts of peer advocacy.
Okay.
So sometimes it's easier to talk in terms of the negatives, what not to do. So What are some ways that you would not want to approach or initiate conversations with a client? What are just maybe some guidelines you could give to help give people an idea?
Well, as we entered into this conversation, we kind of talked about a peer advocate as someone who listens. So I would say when you're really nervous at the beginning, it is hard not to just fill the silence with talking. And I'm not a big talker, but when it's really quiet, you'd be surprised. You just, you kind of chatter at them, and you have to give them time to talk because it's their decision they need to talk through. We're there to give resources and to give information, but don't talk the entire time. I know when I was teaching, it was always helpful to have a videotape of teaching. We can't really do that in a peer advocacy room, but if you could see yourself, just kind of think about that ratio of talk time to listening time.
That's good.
I would also say probably one of the best things about this care center is about compassion, and people say it over and over about how welcoming it is and how compassionate the staff and volunteers are. So we need to avoid being preachy or judgmental. So sometimes it's helpful to share a life experience with a client, but there are other times when sharing, you have to kind of read the client, and sometimes it might come across as, well, I made the right decision and you need to make that
Look
decision
at me,
too.
do what I did.
Right. So you have to be really careful of that, and be careful not to tell someone how they feel. Don't put words in their mouth. If you see a situation, and the longer you're a peer advocate, the more the situations might seem similar, but everybody's situation is a little bit different. They have different people in their lives giving them support or not, and we can never tell someone how they feel about their situation. So.
And sometimes the danger in that is you impose an emotion or you mention emotion, and they're like, I do feel that way. Like one of the best advice I ever got was if someone's telling you their story, to say it sounds like, and then whatever emotion you're hearing, do a lower impact level of it. So if they sound terrified, don't say, you sound terrified. You sound a little apprehensive or a little nervous, and they'll correct you if you're wrong. They'll be like, no, I'm actually terrified. Or, well, yeah, I'm just kind of nervous because, so it can be, I like that. You don't want to impose feelings on other people. What else? What else might be some things you wouldn't want to do?
Don't close off conversation by asking questions that just require a yes or a no, or putting a value on a statement that you've made, which might not be what they're saying. I know you might say, you wouldn't have an abortion, would you? Well, that's really leading them into something.
Would you?
Right. Putting a lot of judgment or value onto that. And always be truthful about a difficult situation, but don't focus on the negative. That kind of goes along with taking it down a notch. And just it takes away their power. So try not to just totally concentrate on the negative portion.
Well, we also never want to make a woman feel like we're discounting the gravity of her situation. I know something I would usually try to do if they were like, there's school, I can't finish school, I can't afford it. I might say something like, it does sound like you have a lot on your plate, but have you thought about this? So like saying, yes, I hear you, but maybe think about it a different way.
Different perspective.
So. Well, those are really good. I want to talk about a few more. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll come back and talk about some more things maybe to avoid in the appointment, and then also some maybe positive ways to communicate advice or constructive criticism. Okay, so we'll be right back. Okay, we're back. We're talking with Stacy Helt about her experience as a peer advocate, and we're going to jump back into how to kind of communicate with clients in different scenarios and things to do and not to do. So, Stacy, what about those times in an appointment when a client needs to be corrected in terms of maybe they're presenting a viewpoint that's not biblically accurate, or maybe they're just not consistent in their reasoning? I'm thinking specifically of, I used to hear a lot, well, God will forgive me, so it's fine, I can have an abortion, or I've prayed about it and I feel like it's just okay. Like, this is an exception. So they'll say in one breath, I believe abortion is wrong, but it'll be fine. Obviously, we know there's an inconsistency there. And because we care about that woman, we want to tell her the truth. What's maybe a gentle way to communicate that to a client? How might you do that?
Usually if I might repeat what the person has said and ask them if that's what they meant to say, and kind of point out the parts of it that are biblically accurate, and maybe give some scripture to back that up. But then as we go back through the statement that they made or the conversation that they were having, to talk about some of the things that were incorrect with what they said, and give examples, or maybe talk about the consequences of what would happen if they really believed that. And so just try to point out what is correct about what they've said, and then just do be truthful, but maybe not blunt or criticizing, but just being really clear about this is what you meant to say, and how can we look at that and see if that would really be what you believe. Yeah,
that's good. I think the temptation is to kind of go one of two extremes, to either be like, you're wrong, or to kind of be like, oh, well, if that's what you think. Yeah, and neither one of those is correct. So I like that middle ground you mentioned. And you kind of mentioned looking for the things that are true about what they said. And that makes me think of like the Oreo method. They say anytime you need to give someone constructive feedback or correct somebody, to cushion it or Oreo cookie it with positives, or with, say, a positive, negative, positive. So sometimes something I would say would be, I can tell you're a really thoughtful person, you're a hard worker, and that you really, you're thinking through this. I'm kind of wondering if maybe you're being a little inconsistent in some of your thinking. And that can go a long way in kind of bringing down people's defenses. And sometimes what you mentioned about asking their permission to share the gospel, that's another way. Is it okay if I share my perspective on this?
That's great.
Just asking permission can really, instead of being like, let me tell you how it is,
Right. With those two extremes that you talked about, we don't want any clients leaving our building either thinking that we're judgmental and hateful, or that we condoned something that wasn't biblical.
Exactly.
So both of those are not okay.
Yeah, for sure. And I've found too, I don't know if you've experienced this, but sometimes you connect more quickly with a client than others, and you get to certain comfort levels with different clients. There have been some clients that I've sat with, I have felt so comfortable saying, listen, that's not right. Listen to what you're saying. That doesn't make sense. And there are other clients that I would tread much more carefully. Have you ever experienced that?
Definitely. I think especially if someone has been going to church all their life, they could tell you the gospel. They are talking about their church life, and they seem to have it all together. And then they get to one or two things that, it might seem minor, but just having to check that and make sure that that falls in line with everything else that they've been saying.
Yeah. So. If there's one thing we know, about us as humans, is that we're masters of justification. Like, we can find reasons to do whatever we want to do. And a lot of times that's what we see and within the client advocacy room. We start justifying, like, well, I think abortion's wrong, or I think sex outside of marriage is wrong, but XYZ.
This is my situation, and it's scary.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's okay.
And you know what? The reason we can sit with them in that room and tell them the truth is because that's us. Like, we may not be in that same situation, but I justify things all the time. I have sin in my own life, and I need Jesus just like they do, and so because we know Christ, we have the responsibility and the ability to tell people the truth, because we'd want people to do that for us, or we should.
And when I try to lead, or very early in the conversation talking about the gospel, that really sets the stage for talking about sin and talking about the whole reason, why we do justify things, and why we're in different situations, and how it's not just you, it's all of us, and
That's
here's
good.
Why. So
yeah, for sure. And it reminds the client that we're not singling them out. We're talking about the human experience here. This in that client room is just one example, one situation, but we all have the same experience of rebelling against God. Right. So that's really good. Well, So tell me about after the client has left, what are some ways that you follow up with that client or try to keep up with them? What does that look like?
Well, it kind of starts at the end of the appointment. I will usually ask the client if I can pray with them. So that kind of lets me know if they're open to that. So then when they've left, I will tell them that I'll be praying for them that week and ongoing. And then I will pray for them as they make a decision or as they go through a difficult situation, whatever they came in for, I'll be praying for them. Some clients I will call regularly, especially if they're undecided or they just seem like they need some extra attention or someone to care about them. I will usually, on their folder before they leave, there's a place to put the advocate's name and phone number.
Right.
And we're told as peer advocates, you don't have to put your number on there. It's whatever you feel comfortable with. So sometimes I do and sometimes I don't, depending, on how comfortable I felt with that client or how much I felt like they needed to talk to somebody. I will offer to be, this is interesting, but I will offer to be an accountability partner. If someone has come in for an STI appointment and we talk about kind of making a plan for abstinence, which some people do, and I'll tell them, if you don't have somebody you can call when you're trying to, hold yourself accountable, then you can call me. So I have done that a few times. I will also emphasize our Titus II program, which is a mentorship program, and tell the clients about how we could partner them with a woman from a local church to kind of do life with and what the benefits of that are. Some people sign up, here in the building before they leave, and that gives them an opportunity to have another person that they could talk to. And then I will usually also, depending on what they've come in for, I will explain the care center classes, like the parenting classes or the life skills classes, really carefully, and the benefits of coming to those. I'll walk them to the desk and help them sign up if they're interested in those. So that gives us a continuation of that relationship. If they are pregnant and eligible, time-wise for an ultrasound, if they were not able to have one at that appointment, we'll go sign up for an ultrasound. So that's another contact time that they could come back and talk with someone. And then sometimes if I don't think I'm going to see a client again, I'm not sure, what they've decided, a lot of times I will give out a Bible and give them some verses to look up. They may or may not do that, but they'll have a Bible.
Right, exactly.
And I can encourage them to email me if they have any questions about that. And that I haven't had anybody take me up on that, but I would love that. So,
well, it sounds like, when an appointment's over, it's not just, okay, see ya. We give them lots of options.
Right.
Yeah. And to somebody that they can reach out to. And sometimes, like you said, just the accountability of knowing someone's going to call you, that can kind of get you thinking, keep you on your toes a little bit. So that's really cool. And we've had advocates who have, kind of along the same route as the Titus II program, have met clients for coffee or met up with them later just because they really hit it off and they have ongoing relationships. So so that's really cool. Well, as we kind of close here, just share briefly, how has your experience as a peer advocate grown you or challenged you personally?
Well, we talked earlier in the conversation about how scary it is at the beginning to share the gospel. And that was not something I was really used to doing. And now I've done it hundreds of times. And it really feels good to be able to do that. And not just as a skill, but just because it's wonderful. It's a blessing to be able to do that. It has helped me fine-tune my beliefs about life and abortion and God's design for sex, all of those. I have taught a couple classes here early on about all kinds of things, and just it's helped me learn as well. And I'm learning how to share my beliefs with people of all different faiths. Whoever walks through the door, I'm able to be a little more flexible on, okay, how am I going to handle this appointment? And the more appointments you do, the easier it is. At the beginning, it will be nerve-wracking and it'll be a little scary, and that's okay.
Right.
That's understandable, but the more you do it, the easier it is, just like with a lot of things. So,
well, and I think with, anything in the Christian life, you can't follow Christ without taking some risk. You know what I mean? Like, whenever we take risk and do things that are uncomfortable for us, that's when God moves, and that's when he gets glory. And now you mentioned being an introvert. I would say like the majority of our advocates here are introverts, and which is, crazy, because it's like, why would anyone do that? Why would you go into a room and have these uncomfortable conversations? But I think that's just evidence of God's work in your heart and in the hearts of our other advocates, just being willing to be uncomfortable because there's something greater at stake. We're talking about the lives of unborn children, yes, 100%, but also about, these people's souls. Like, they need Christ. Exactly. And we just want to offer them love and compassion. And so it's really neat to hear you talk about how it's impacted you. What advice would you give to someone who's listening and is kind of interested, but maybe a little terrified and a little uncertain? Maybe they have some of the same reasons as you about your nervousness in the beginning. What would you say to them?
I would say definitely pray about it. If you feel that God is leading you to do this, come to an open house. There is no obligation whatsoever. When you come, you will find out more information, and you'll find out if it's right for you. There are all kinds of ways to be plugged in. We have volunteer teams here. So you might learn more about the Care Center and decide there are other things you want to volunteer with. But coming to that open house is a first step to finding all about the Care Center and deciding whether it's right for you and whether it's something that you want to do. But after that, people will kind of guide you through the process if it's something that you feel like you want to do.
Yeah, for sure. And it's definitely, I'm sure you'd probably agree, it's not for everyone, peer advocacy. But like you said, definitely come to the open house, check it out. We'll get you plugged in some way. I believe every Christian has a role to play in this ministry of helping women in unplanned pregnancy. Stacy, thank you so much for just giving us a window into peer advocacy. I know this will be so helpful to our listeners. And for those of you who are listening, thank you so much for tuning in. We want you to know that we are hearing your feedback, and we're working hard to keep improving the quality and giving you awesome content on this podcast. So if you haven't already, subscribe, and thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.